what we call the U.S. Flag Small Boat Coalition, something we started out in March with the three main influence purposes to be influence disaster grants and loans. Originally, none of those loans were intended to go to anything but, or any cruise entity of any kind. And being a U.S. flag business, we wanted to make sure. We also influence regulatory at the SBA, Treasury, United States Coast Guard, FMC, CDC. We're on with them almost at least weekly. And then lastly, influencing the upcoming market, the return to business, which I just have to say before I go into further detail, Alaska and Hawaii are going to rock this return. I am convinced of it. And I just look forward to chatting on that and seeing how we're all going to work together to make that happen. Thank you, Dan.
Thank you, Dan. Camille?
Yeah, well, thank you, Lee, for having me here, and Dan for coordinating all of us, and everyone who is listening. My name is Camille Ferguson. I'm the Economic Development Director for the Sitka Tribe of Alaska, and I have historically worked for the tribe 15 years, working on cultural tourism development before moving on to the American Indian Alaska Native Tourism Association, in developing cultural tourism for pretty much the tribes across the nation and working with them. And I'm looking forward to this panel. I have been working on collaborative efforts in trying to bring tribes to partner and work with within the tourism industry. And so this is really exciting to be here. Lee brought me aboard last year, and this is just a springboard. And this is some exciting things that we're going to be able to share with you, and opportunities that are just going to enrich the experience of visitors. So with that, I'm looking forward to this discussion, and I'm really excited to be here. So thank you.
Thank you, Camille. Mary.
Yeah, hi guys, my name is Mary Goddard, and I'm the Regional Catalyst for Regenerative Tourism. First off, I just want to say thank you, Lee, for inviting me to be part of this panel, and thank you, Daniel, for hosting, and for the participants for listening. I guess I just want to start off by saying, with this position, I'm part of the Sustainable Southeast Partnership. And if you're unfamiliar with this network, it's a diverse network of organizations and individuals working together to reach cultural, ecological, and economic prosperity for our communities and regions. And with that, I think the biggest question I get is, if you're the regional catalyst for regenerative tourism, what is regenerative tourism? And so although I'm going to share a definition with you, I think many of us will know that regenerative is not a new thing. It's based really on ancient wisdom, but it is, I guess, a word that is being used more and more. And I guess my hope is that everyone will begin to recognize what that is. So regenerative tourism is a holistic approach to tourism that proactively works to improve ecosystems, elevate local economies, and promote meaningful and responsible visitor experiences. Authentic local representation, deep community involvement, and practical and innovative steps for conserving and enhancing the environment are central to this approach. Regenerative tourism reveals how the tourism industry can protect, enable, and grow strategies that benefit communities, cultures, and ecosystems of Southeast Alaska.
Thank you, Mary. Thanks. And I think that framework is a really useful one to start off some of the questions that I have for you all. And in particular, I wanted to dive into questions of diversity and equity and inclusion in the tourism businesses. Now, both in terms, diversity in very broad strokes terms, but also thinking about emerging opportunities for cultural tourism. I wanted to start off, maybe Dan could take the first crack at this question, but certainly I hope other folks will weigh in. And And Dan, I would say, many outdoor businesses desire the added value of diversity in their businesses. And I was wondering if you could speak to some of the value of that diversity, and particularly maybe take it from a maritime industry approach.
Yeah, certainly. Thank you, Dan. I think that as we grow as an industry in Alaska, one thing that we all have to recognize is that Alaska is diverse in some ways and not diverse in others. And what we've found is that our guests coming from whether it be the lower 48 or Australia, New Zealand, Europe, they actually prefer a diverse and inclusive workforce. And what we've found specifically in our case in the maritime world is that for decades now, we've had a diverse workforce as in our expedition teams, in our galleys, in our dining rooms, in our steward ranks. But it's really been a challenge to find diversity, particularly sexual diversity, in the ranks of nautical mariners, licensed mariners. And starting in 1996, we started to realize when we came and brought the company together that we wanted to change this. And we kind of took on a mentality that this person doesn't always come to us. In other words, it's just now that we're starting to see, for instance, females graduating from maritime academies. That's a relatively new thing. But back in the early to mid 90s, that was not common. And so what we did is we had a mentality of dishwasher to master. In other words, come on board as a dishwasher, 6-7 years later, you'll be a ship's master. And that has happened many times. In fact, I have 2 women that are captains for me now that have broke through that barrier. They're both young and basically came from the galley or steward position through the ranks. So that was a corporate decision we made to allow that to happen when it wasn't really happening to the level we wanted it on the outside. That's just one nautical piece of this, and we're starting to see that grow, although still engineers. It's hard to find female engineers. We do find a diverse background of races in all the other positions that we have, but we also had to go outside Alaska. I mean, let's face it, we're a fairly homogenous society in Alaska outside of local native culture and Caucasians. And we're just a small percentage of ethnicities in Alaska. So when we started recruiting, particularly from the lower 48, we began to bring in all sorts of different ethnicities that have really changed the culture of our company for the better. And it's been really exciting to see. I think, but we also have to think about, when we talk about diversity, we tend to think oftentimes about race. We oftentimes think about it as sex, but we very rarely in the outdoor industry think about it as age. And age to me is one, because I'm getting older, gang, but I'm not getting worse, I'm getting better. But age is a thing. And what we know is that many of our guests are oftentimes in their 50s, 60s, 70s, maybe a little younger, but that's the majority. But how are we as operators not only really providing a platform with diverse activities that can handle all age groups, but then the bigger question is, are we age discriminatory? Are we age discriminatory? And I would say that for the most part, we are. And so what we've been really working on is not just being inclusive on race and sex, but being inclusive on age. And we've had really, really good fortune bringing on school teachers, professors that are in their 50s, 60s, even early 70s, that bring a different flavor and maturity on board our boats that we've never seen. And so when you have a bunch of young people, and then all of a sudden you got mom and dad or grandma and grandpa in there, it changes the whole psyche, not only of what we do for our guests, but how it is on board. So I think to wrap up, Dan, I think, the whole idea of diversity and being inclusive is more than what our sunglasses always filter out. It's really a much broader spectrum. And I think one of the things we found is over the years, we've had to start recruiting in the lower 48 heavier just because there aren't enough jobs or people available for all the jobs during the summer in Alaska. And that's been a real eye opener. So I encourage everyone to kind of maybe change the lens on what they're looking at diversity to be and how to get there.
Thanks, Dan. Mary, this was a question that you and I emailed back and forth about because it was one that I was having trouble phrasing, I thought, in a useful way, but I think we can build off Dan's statement here. Small business like myself, looking to hire locally, looking to incorporate different perspectives, and maybe what I might be running up against is the challenge of wanting the value of that diversity, but still wanting an employee who looks like all my other employees, has the same certifications, is willing to take a pretty low paying job, has 4 months to take off to do it, can work for experiences. And you had some useful feedback about the value of that diversity, but also how businesses might approach it.
Yeah, so I think when I was thinking about diversity, when we're talking about this, I was really thinking, in the terms of regenerative tourism, like as much as we can hiring local, because if we're able to hire local, those local dollars are staying in our communities. And I think that's really important. However, I know what Dan's talking about, because a lot of times you'll go to hire someone, and if that job can't be filled by a local community member, then you do have to look outside. So when we're talking about being equitable, it is, I think, just looking beyond what you think the barrier might be to hiring that employee. For instance, you were talking about, well, it might be too low of a pay, but unless you have that relationship with that community or that group of people, I don't think you're really going to be able to understand what the barrier is for them not working for your company. And so, number one, I think it starts with relationship. And that relationship building is going to help you to understand what those barriers are from keeping the people that you want to be hired into your business. And so, if you're really wanting someone local to fill that position because you know that it's going to add to the economy, you know that it's going to add to your business, you know that it's going to give an authentic visitor experience, it's going to add value to your business, then you just need to really start understanding what that barrier is. And then once you understand that, you can help remove it. So if the barrier is low pay, how do you bridge the gap between the busy tourism season, which we hope will come back, right, to the low, quiet, off-season months, which are winter and spring. So it's working on bridging those gaps, but we can't just assume that it's low pay that they're not doing it, or we can't just assume that it's because they don't have the certification or the training. I think it has to start with that relationship and begin to really understand what those barriers are. And which, if we're thinking ahead in these smaller communities, one of the new barriers may be COVID, health concerns. You may want to hire someone from Rangoon, but their concern now may have switched from just income-based or whatever their issue is last year or this year to their concerns for their family, because then as small communities, we want to protect our elders. We want to protect our children. We want to protect our communities. And so I think we have to really understand those barriers.
Mary, open it up to Camille or Sarah, if you have anything you want to add on to that before I gin up and rephrase my next question.
Well, I'm springboarding off what Mary just said. When we first started cultural tourism in Sitka and we were developing our cultural tour program, finding guides to want to understand tourism was a challenge. And I think that in itself was a barrier, is to teach, tribal people what tourism is and how tourism can benefit them, to alleviate that barrier that seems to be the block. Because there are those cultural barriers that, unfortunately, history has put that barrier there, that if we have the ability to educate and train within our communities the benefits of what cultural tourism can bring, that in itself will help tremendously. And then, I know that you also mentioned, we're talking about diversity, and we talk about diversity, and you kind of had these categories of diversity, but diversity in content is just as important. If we can add diversity in all aspects of how we're sharing Alaska, that's really unique. Because our diversity is, we have the maritime, we do have, culture. What is culture? A way of life. We have so many different ways of life, depending on what area of Alaska you're in, to talk about. And so I think that when we talk diversity, we need to look at diversity in all aspects to really make a rich product for Alaska. So, I was just thinking about, the discussions that you guys were, what we've been talking about. And it just came to, there's so much that we can do. And anyways, I just wanted to add that into the barrier and diversity question.
And Dan and panelists, I, have managing any small organization or small business, and ATIA in many ways is like a small business. We have 8 full-time employees, which might be mid-sized for a nonprofit, but we look at things like a small business as well, and experience some of the same challenges in trying to, in our workforce and in our own hiring, be more diverse, certainly committed to that. And what really struck me, I don't know if it was Captain Dan, starting off by saying that it's not just as far as diversity in hiring and in internal operations, it's not so much just putting your job opportunities out there, and just opening it up, but it's really going to the organizations and starting to build those partnerships, and kind of building off of what you said, Mary. I think what really struck with me, it's not just saying you want to be diverse, but having those targeted, whether it's HR policies or strategies to reach out to either build on those partnerships or establish those partnerships. So you're providing whatever opportunities you have to various groups, not just posting, potentially a job description on your website. And then, kind of flipping it to, from my perspective, I think we talk a lot at ATA beyond the workforce diversity, what Camille was talking about, and in our content and in our product and in the experiences. And ATIA is constantly trying to improve and add diversity in our marketing messages and imagery. And that benefits not only, Alaska tourism, cultural tourism, sustainable tourism, but it opens up markets for different businesses. So if you're showing diversity in cultures and people and experiences, you're showing potential visitors and clients, something that they can connect with and want to come visit. And so, Camille, what you really said resonated with me in that I think moving forward, especially out of, as we're recovering from this pandemic, and we will recover, it's about really looking at how we can open up and be more inclusive with our marketing messaging to attract different clientele, or maybe new visitors that might not have considered Alaska before, but then they can see themselves or see messages or stories that they really connect with, and they want to come visit Alaska. So just to add on to both of those kind of components from the discussion.
Great. Yeah. Well, something that this discussion has made me think about is the Lunch and Learn that Luke Mell did, Lee, through you guys, I guess last week. And it was hosting a discussion about, some of the programs, but then also personal adventures that he's run in smaller communities around the state. And I think that was a really useful discussion for highlighting that outdoors does not necessarily always have to be followed by solely recreation, that there's a lot to the outdoors in terms of the ways in which we connect with it. And so, Camille, I wanted to ask you about this idea, building off your previous thoughts. As more Alaskans, and particularly Alaska Natives, are looking at opportunities in a cultural component of tourism, how do we make sure that businesses are making this empowering and not exploitative? How is this feel good at the end of the day? What steps should businesses be thinking about there?
Well, and if you want an authentic experience and you really want to have it maintain the integrity of the people you are representing, then it is real important that you listen to the people that are sharing their story, their culture, their history, and that it is kind of controlled by the individual tribe. And working with the tribes, and the messaging we had is take control of your story and work with your partners so your partners agree that you guys agree on how these will be interpreted. It's a partnership with tribes. And, the amount of enrichment that you can add to your, say that you're doing just a hiking tour, right? And you want to add a tribal component to it. You're walking by and you're saying there's a spruce tree and that mountain's called this and this mountain's called that. If you incorporate a tribal component and you're getting some of the historical stories behind it, you're doing place names, you're doing edible and traditional and medicinal plants. You're learning about what these art pieces that you're seeing in the stores are actually made of traditionally. So you're really enhancing that experience. But in order for you to enhance that experience, you have to have a partner that has that kind of knowledge. And that knowledge is only gained by our elders and taught to our youth. And so it's something that has to be, and we've always talked about, what is appropriate to share. And so I think by going through the tribes that want to be part of the tour, letting them know that they can be in control of the content, that in itself is the path, the best path to go when you're working with tribes. And so, that's my recommendation. And that's what we had to do. When I developed a cultural tour program here in Sitka, was to get everything authorized by the elders. And then I had the youth, I had my young dancers, and they were taught by the elders, and then they became the teachers to the visitors, which to me is magical. And it's also a perpetuation. And it's no different than having a commercial fisherman working with you, telling you exactly the difference of how they fish and what they're fishing for. It's the same thing. It's just working with your different segments, but making sure that you elevate your partner, who is, in my opinion, the professor, educating all the way. So that's kind of my recommendation. When you're developing your partnerships for a cultural experience. Did I answer that, or did I go off?
Yeah, and I think
Okay.
I have a follow-up question then, I think, to everybody on the panel, is, for a business that might not have, those relationships right now, is there a best practices that we could encourage someone to develop, or that there might be an entity that could develop for businesses seeking to do that process that Camille's describing?
Can I just really quick, I want to commend ATIA and Lee, because they're taking that step right now by trying to encourage tribes to come to the table, to be a part of this dynamic industry called tourism. And when tribes are brought to the table and they're being part of these coordinated efforts for training and development, you are actually creating that network that is needed to build those relationships. So I commend what is going on right now. And I think we are taking steps in that direction, but that's kind of, I believe, is one of the methods that best work is what we call inclusion. And tribes being included, is important. And that's how you're going to build those networks and gaining that trust to be able to partner. That's my thought.
Thanks for the shout out, Camille. And I was just going to add, your question, what's the best practice on making sure you're being appropriately inclusive? And I think sometimes there's a hesitancy to want to ask and invite in that inclusion in the right way. And sometimes, and I just want to do this with an example of trying to bring tribal voices to a discussion, and encouraged by Camille, it's not like not asking any other stakeholder or important partner. So it was just a matter of reaching out by email and asking, could you be involved, or do you want to be engaged in this discussion? So I think it's sort of from some people's aspects, and I'm speaking personally, is just sort of to maybe get through that hesitancy and just ask. And I think, again, Camille has said this to me in different instances as a board member at ATIA. It's just making that ask like you would any other stakeholder, a public land manager, another, a tourism sector person. So I don't know if, if Mary or Camille have other advice or guidance on what best practice might be, but just again, speaking personally, I think it's just, we talk about wanting to be inclusive, and then it's just really following that up with action and making those invitations.
And just to chime in, Sarah, in response to if there's anybody else, I guess, to reach out to, there's other organizations, right, Camille, like Alaska Native Voices. Alan Marine has partnered with them to be their cultural guides and really share some of their stories and make sure that those stories were coming from Alaska Natives. I think if you're a business and you're looking, I guess looking for more resources, there's the First Alaska's Institute. I'm sure they'd be happy to talk to your business and offer some advice and some guidelines. And so there's definitely organizations out there.
And I would like to also kind of turn it around too, because I think it's inviting tribes to learn about what tourism is and the benefits of tourism. And I think once that benefit is really understood and they understand that the control of what their content is sharing and their ability to do really, it's winning on both ends. Because to be honest with you, the hardest thing I ever did was to try to bring the understanding and value of what tourism is to the tribe when they didn't really understand what tourism could do in the way it could not only economically benefit, but socially benefit and bring back pride to who we were, because it was kind of beaten down. And so when you have an elder tell you, well, this is good because this is good for our children, you're doing the right thing. So I think by being able to integrate and invite tribes to be a part of some of the Alaska Host training seminars, the understanding, the economic benefits of tourism by inviting them to McDowell studies, those kind of things. So it's a learning on both ways. I think it's important.
And I'd really like to thank folks who've been shooting me private messages or throwing messages in the chat. It's interesting for me to think about, and I'd like to reference a question that Carol asked about compensation for that work, right? Because if we're going to a tribe and asking them for stories that are theirs, that we're going to then use to increase the value of our tour, there could be and there should be some kind of business arrangement there, Camille, perhaps.
Exactly. And I, I'm still on the board for IANTA. My ultimate goal was to make sure that our elders were compensated at the level of professors. That we too are our people. We always invite elders to come in and do beading demonstration and Tlingit language. And we're realizing that their time is valuable, and what they're bringing to the table is sustainable. And so we too are looking at how are we going to compensate, and just as, compensate our elders and those who are, I know I got a gentleman who works for the tribe, and he's in his 40s, and he's a cultural barrier, and he has so much knowledge that is incredible. And you're right. There should be a compensation value to it, just like you would a marketing person, or just like you would someone who's helping you write a book. So yeah, you're absolutely right.
So I have a question for Sarah. I might pitch this to you to start. I think one of the things that I've spent a lot of time thinking about is, what is it about Alaska that draws people here? Why is it that we're such an appealing destination to come to? And there's recreational infrastructure that's our natural infrastructure, and then our cultural infrastructure, but then there's also the infrastructure. How do we grow and sustain our recreational infrastructure, our tourism infrastructure, in the context of COVID, in the context of changing climate, in the context of decreasing budgets? How do we keep what we've got strong, particularly for smaller communities or remote communities that are maybe interested in getting into tourism?
And that's a big question. One of the things that I wanted to bring to the discussion and the table was our Adventure Green Alaska program, which pre-COVID, ATIA took on to promote around sustainable ecotourism. It's a voluntary certification program that highlights principles of sustainable economic, cultural, community benefits. And there are climate change resources as part of that. And that program for tour operators and accommodations was accredited by the Global Sustainable Tourism Council. And I mention it in that, to your question, how can a tourism or recreation industry and the infrastructure associated with that grow from this pandemic or recover? I think more and more the resiliency and, I'm using the word resilient and sustainable kind of interchangeably, so I don't know if that's kosher, but I think more and more the resiliency of our industry and our infrastructure and maintaining those resources will become not only more important for industry operators and business owners, but also to continue to build trust and travel to destinations like Alaska for visitors coming that are looking to travel. And there is pent up demand for travel, kind of ebbs and flows depending on what the virus is doing, quite frankly, is what we're seeing. But there is pent up demand, and I think there will continue to be for travel. Along with that, I think travelers are going to be looking for that resilient, safe, adapted tourism experience. And what's great about Alaska, and what has been even before COVID, is that we have these incredible experiences. We're such a large state. By default, we kind of social distance anyway. We have a really resilient businesses that have been involved in making their infrastructure and their businesses sustainable and more resilient, and I think can adapt and are adapting to recover from this pandemic. So I think that's all tied into looking at and maintaining the infrastructure that we have, adapting it to provide a safe and still great and amazing experience in Alaska, based on some of these sustainable principles and that are, you know, people are talking more about resiliency principles or practices. I think that all ties in together. And it's what our market will be looking for, but it's also what I think industry needs to do and continue to do as we're recovering from this pandemic.
Okay, well, building on that then, Dan, why is Alaska positioned to rock this recovery?
Why is Alaska positioned to rock the recovery? You know, I actually think, Dan and everybody, first of all, Sarah, awesome comments. I mean, I think we are so set up for a recovery in Alaska. We have what people are looking for. But at why Alaska and Hawaii specifically, I believe we kind of had an opportunity this last late summer for Alaska to kind of pull off the whole, rapid testing at the airport and this kind of thing. It didn't happen. But now it's happening for travelers going to Hawaii. I happen to have a sister and 2 other family members in separate groups. So 3 family groups over in Hawaii right now that left last week. And what they're finding is the rapid testing is becoming more available. Here in Seattle, unfortunately, I'm down here for the duration, guys. I miss you. But I got to be here. I got to be running the show. But what's happening here in Seattle, there's actually, downtown Seattle has a 2-hour testing thing that Alaska Airlines putting on. Now we moved that to the airport for Alaska during the upcoming season, and we have a change, but this is all being practiced right now with Hawaii, this whole 72-hour test thing. We've been living through it as Alaskans, but the public is starting to accept it in terms of Hawaii. And so many people are coming. I think they had a 15,000 person day, as I recall, which was the biggest day they've had, since March. And this is bringing people back because they feel like, one, they're going to be safe if they're tested around others. And 2, they're feeling that the state has taken beyond the normal precautions. So I look into the spring and look into March, April, May, and think, okay, if we can get rapid testing for Alaska, Alaska has been safe, Alaska has been isolated. If we don't take down our guard and keep pressing our precautions, and then maybe we mix in, pray to God, some kind of greater therapeutic or even a vaccine. And, I think we have a chance to rock it just from that standpoint. But I also believe that Alaska is what people want. It's because we run a boat in Hawaii, we take advantage of a blind survey that they do of thousands of people every month. And when I say blind, they don't come out and say we're the Hawaii Visitors Association. It's just on travel. And everything is indicating that outdoor active tours and experiences, cultural experiences are the thing that's happening. I've been amazed as I've been trying to find stuff to do around Seattle, everything outdoors, every park, every recreation area, every small hotel is absolutely booked for months. So we have that advantage in Alaska to a greater degree. So, I'll shut up, Dan. I think you get the message. I'm pretty passionate about the fact that if we do this right, we've got the opportunity. If we do it wrong, we'll just end up like last summer and we'll stumble. We have to have rapid testing. Have to. Vote for it.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. Changing tacks a little bit here. I think the core elements of I agree with you entirely, Dan, right? People want to come up here. The handful of folks that we took out this summer showed to me that there's this pent up demand for Alaska. And I was surprised at how many people actually did come. Now, of course, there are the core elements of the visitor experience here, right? From a very very simple marketing terms, I'm going to put a glacier, a bear, or a whale on it. And the other leg of that chair, of course, is the cultural element, right? Those are the ways that we talk about tourism here. Climate change has the potential to change a lot of this stuff. What are the opportunities of a changing climate? And I should hopefully say that they were taking for granted that we all see ourselves as taking actions that are going to address climate change. But as we do that, as we address climate change, how do we tell that story? How do we show those changes in a way that is empowering and not, depressing and leads people away from positive action? What are we doing about the weather? And that's open to anybody.
I guess if you don't mind, Dan, I'll chime in. I feel like a lot of the answers to whether it's climate change or an authentic visitor experience, it really begins with the relationship building. And it's not just partnership to partnership or organization to organization, but it is also that organization to that visitor. And if we're able to tell authentic stories and really show what's going on with the environment, and we're able to still provide this amazing experience. If we're doing our job, we're going to be able to give these visitors meaningful experiences that they're really going to feel connected to Alaska. And so whether that's, buying into programs like the Alaska Green, or buying into new visitor programs that we're hoping to create that will help stimulate change or stimulate thoughts towards working for a better environment, it's gonna have to start with those relationships. I feel like I trailed off a little bit, and I had a thought I wanted to capture on that.
This is where another panelist might just wade in and say,
I'll jump in.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. Because I think
But Mary, come back in if you think of it, because I know how that is when.
Well, and I guess, Sarah, since you were chiming in, it was because of something you said, and you had talked about if we're going to have visitors come to Alaska, we have to build that trust, right? So that's where the relationship comes in. Whether it's a pledge of health, whether it's what Dan was talking about with taking these rapid tests, how is it that we're going to be able to build the trust for the visitor industry, but also our partners that we're working with. So, all right, back to you.
No, yeah, glad I could help out there, Mary. I was going to offer that I think, one, early on in Arctic discussions, ATIA advocated, and we have an Arctic tourism policy, that in these climate change discussions, the tourism industry should be a voice at the table. So ATIA has, for several years, advocated for this voice at the table around, as we've seen Arctic seas open up to small cruise ships, to communities potentially hosting new cruise ships, that just our voice should be at the table in these Arctic discussions around climate change. And then I think the other thing that comes to mind as talking about resiliency and adapting, I've really learned from some other businesses about, it's sort of this great adapting experience or experiment with climate change. How do you adapt your business to changing landscapes or, changing communities, and still provide a safe and a valuable experience? And so I think, for COVID, businesses were already thinking of adapting because climate change is such a big impact, especially for a destination like Alaska. And then following up on what Mary said, it also, I think, as part of that adapting for tourism experiences, you can really offer authentic experiences and build on natural history and cultural history interpretation on what's happening within the landscapes in Alaska, what's happening with our salmon populations or our coastal communities. I mean, these are things that you can teach to visitors and share real life experiences of how people in Alaska are hopefully adapting to a changing climate. And I think that's also really important, just to, again, build on what I think Mary was commenting on.
Right. So then I want to take that and throw it to Dan and ask you, maybe back in the realm of the infrastructure and needs, as we start down this road of adapting and recovering, what does that look like in terms of our needs of more roads, more ports, but also how do we balance that with keeping Alaska the way people imagine it, this undeveloped, scenic landscape?
Yeah, those are really good questions, Dan. I'm not sure I have all the answers, but by any means. However, I think that, when we talk about Alaska from an environmental standpoint, the greatest thing we can do is give people appreciation for the wild. Let's face it, we're being whores to ourselves if we sit there and say they don't have to hop on a jet that's burning fuel. We are not the most eco-sensitive area to get to because there's a lot of fuel being burned. But what we can do, the bright side of this is we can show people a wild place that is untouched and that gives them hope for a world that's out there that they don't have at home. So we are all certainly taking our, opportunities to, reduce fuel consumption, reduce waste, try to get things more local, all the things that every company that I work with is involved in. But I think there's a bigger picture when we talk about, the ecological impact of the travel industry on our world and in Alaska specifically. Of what we really can do is we're the bright shining star, we should be, of how it works right in an untouched area. As to development of infrastructure and this kind of thing, it's my belief that at least in Southeast Alaska that we're in pretty good shape. That for the last 30 or 40 years, the forest has had a chance to recover and we're doing well. And we all know that that's due to change potentially here very soon. So we'll need to watch that. But just to get back to it, I think we're all doing our efforts to be better stewards. But at the same time, I think the greatest thing we can do for our world is show off what we have, and maybe try to run shorter trips. This kind of thing. I know back in the day when I was running for Exploration Cruise Lines as a deck officer, it was 7 days, 7 towns. You did an interior tour all in 10 days. And, those days hopefully are gone by. Hopefully people come and spend a longer time in our different homes in Sitka and Juneau and in Anchorage and such, and spend more quality kind of peacetime in Alaska.
Yeah, great. Great.
I don't know if I answered your question at all.
Well, I don't think it's the sort of question that had a, like one. It wasn't a math problem.
Okay. Well, I feel I'm off the hook then.
Yeah. Well, some folks are weighing in here with some great questions. And I think that some of these, I'm going to dive into some of these and then kind of ask the panelists sort of a summary question about where they see our industry, the outdoors in Alaska in the next 5 to 10 years. Opportunities, what are the positive things we've done. There's a question here about what do we do with maybe fewer people coming for longer. I know I'm not technically on the panel, but that was certainly my experience running a business this summer. We have, over the course of like the past 2 decades, Dan, I think you'd agree with this, we've seen people looking for shorter experiences, more inclusive. And then all of a sudden, I had people who were coming up here and they were going to stay in Juneau for 10 days. I had a couple who was in Juneau for a month. And they said, what else do you got for us? Because we're around. And we said, well, would you like to go on a second bear tour? I think there really is an opportunity to look at different business models that do look at higher value, lower volume, that explore lower volume, folks who are maybe looking for more engaged activity, but maybe not as high a cost activity. It certainly seems like everything's up in the air there. I think then jumping off of Chris's comment, I'll start with you, Camille. 5 to 10 years, Alaska, what's good? What have we done? What opportunities have we seized?
Well, I'm really hoping that, we've been setting the stage for growth in cultural tourism, and cultural tourism has been growing exponentially. People that do come and want a tribal experience normally tend to stay longer, and they are normally higher educated. They want to learn. So I think if I was to have a crystal ball, which, lately has been not very crystally clear, but say I look in it and I'm looking at this and I'm saying, okay, this is what we're doing today. We are now looking at diversifying everything within the state of Alaska, including who we work with, what content we're saying, and 10 years from now, we're taking advantage of laws that are put in place, which, and I'm going to mention the Native American Tourism Improving Visitors Experience Act, which is a bill that was actually passed in 1997. It was a bill that I was very passionate about working on, and it was intended to make a mandate where federal agencies include tribes when they're developing tourism and tourism product within federal lands. It also opened up the gateways for federal grants because it now put tourism in there where tourism wasn't. So there are federal agencies that are now including tourism as part of their planning process. An example is Endowment of the Arts. All of those are tourism, or now tourism. EDA or the ANA now has tourism language in there. So accessing funds because of a law that was put in place. So if we can start creating the awareness of these other opportunities for tourism development within the tribes, which we only have the largest amount of tribes anywhere in the United States within our own one state, and really take advantage of the inclusion and diversity, what we're setting up right now, the laws that are being passed. I think that Alaska is really in a great position for economic and social growth within our smaller villages. So I think there's some great opportunities because of what we're doing today.
Sarah, same question.
Yeah, I was hoping that Camille would also mention like Sitka tribal tours. I don't know if there's an outdoor component, but certainly a cultural experience. The other example that comes to mind just right off the bat is Icy Straits and the Huna Totem, where they've created really a destination for to have a zip line experience and also experience their cultural stories out of Huna Totem. So there's a couple at different maybe ends of the spectrum in both Sitka and in Huna. There's also sort of a more I guess more museum-like attraction right here in Anchorage, the Alaska Native Heritage Center. There's an outdoor component. It might be an aggressive hiking experience, but you can take an outdoor walking tour and then learn about the different regions of and cultures of Alaska. So I think more and more outdoor experiences and those businesses are looking to incorporate authentic stories, whether it's about mining history or native culture, Russian Orthodox culture. I think more and more businesses are really, because visitors are asking for that, looking to see how they can incorporate those stories and that natural or cultural history component into their experiences.
Mary, 5 to 10 years, what did we nail? What did we?
Oh my
what did we
gosh, I would
crush?
say we would be the leader in regenerative tourism.
Right on.
And you know, it sounds like a really big vision and goal, but if we can learn from other countries that are leaders in regenerative tourism, you know, it's not too far-fetched. Regenerative, like I said earlier, is not a relatively new term. When we look at other companies that talk about regenerative tourism, they're really based in indigenous values or knowledge systems. But it's as simple as seeing how we're all interconnected and how we can benefit one another rather than using tourism as a extractive economy. How can we add to our economy? How can we add to our environment? And so I think what that looks like for me is companies raising up to be innovative and being problem solvers and doing this in a creative way. When it comes to outdoor recreation, you know, when I think of Alaska and tourism, I don't separate it. Almost so much of what we experience is outdoor. Whether it's, you know, coming from the cruise ship to the dock, whether it's getting off the airplane and going to a hike. So I really don't see the two separated. Yeah, so I would say that we would raise up some really good leaders in regenerative tourism, that we would be able to be examples for other places around the world to look at us and say, okay, they're doing this right.
Wonderful. And Dan, I'll finish by asking you the same question. 5 to 10 years, what are we crushing?
Well, I think with climate change and all that's on the table, I think we are in the best position of pretty much any destination out there. I really honestly believe that. However, I think that Alaska has to remain very nimble and move forward and not get stuck in what's been the past. You know, Dan, you've been hearing me preach, and I'm looking at Sarah and others, Lee, you know, we are the only major outdoor recreation in the world that still doesn't have a world-class hut-to-hut. And, you know, it's that I honestly, before COVID, thought, you know, I might sell part of the business and spend the next 20 years of my life building out the frigging hut-to-hut, because that is what the world wants. That is what brings the backpacker, the expensive ritzy traveler. And the thing is, all sorts of companies can run that same trail. So, you know, I believe the future is very bright, but we have to do the wise things now. We have to make sure that we remain Alaska the great land, and not just become a resource or oriented society again. That's super important in Southeast. And by the way, I just have to say kudos to Sea Alaska for almost 90% of their forest and sequestration. Rock that one, huh?
Well, I think, you know, for myself, this has been such an eye-opener this year, and that positive outlook really seems correct to me. I think that there's going to be folks coming, there's going to be enthusiasm coming to Alaska, and that nimbleness, Dan, that you said, is what we're going to need, so that we're not just providing what we used to provide. And I think that's a really exciting opportunity. At this point, I'd like to wrap up by thanking each of our panelists: Mary Goddard with Allen Marine and the Sustainable Southeast Partnership, Camille Ferguson with the Sitka Tribe, Dan Blanchard with Uncruise Adventures, and Sarah Leonard with HIA. Thank you for your wisdom and insight, and letting me make up a whole bunch of questions on the fly. And then thank you to Lee for bringing this group together. This has been a really useful creative output. The Alaska Outdoor Alliance, very excited to be a part of it now and into the future as well. So Lee, if you have anything else to say in wrapping up, I'll pass it off to you. Otherwise, for myself, I'd just like to thank everyone who tuned in for listening to these guys.
Well, thank you, Dan, Mary, Camille, Captain Dan, and Sarah. Really inspired by the thought-provoking insights and ideas that you've shared, and that hopefully we will continue to develop and explore. This session ends day 1 of Confluence. You know, we're just 5 sessions this year. But we hope you'll come back, that everyone listening will come back tomorrow. We're going to be talking about different aspects of outdoor recreation in the different sectors, the different sectors that it naturally allies with, like active transportation for that close to home, safer streets for walking and biking, which is also something tourists enjoy. And then in the morning, that's the afternoon session. And in the morning, we have really, I'm looking forward to this conversation. It's about mental health and overcoming traumas. And we have from Heidelberg, we have Damon Bell-Holter, who's a former pro basketball player from Prince of Wales, who's kind of taken on, post his basketball career, has gotten into cycling and has a nonprofit he started calling Break the Bicycle to address heightened awareness and sensitivity to mental health issues among Black and Indigenous men. And then we also have Stacy Bear from Adventure Not War, a Iraq War veteran. It should be a really, I'm not sure what the tourism component of it might be, but it's going to be an amazing conversation. And so I just want to, and then on Thursday, I want to close with saying we will have that's our policy day. The last day of Confluence is always a policy day. And we're talking about a couple winter recreation questions, and then the overall investment strategy into outdoor recreation infrastructure, and some of the ideas and needs. And one in particular that fits in well with this conversation is we have Representative Guarantar and New Mexico Representative Angelica Rubio will be introducing an idea of the Outdoor Equity Fund, which in New Mexico broke ground like globally. In their legislature created a fund that was matched by industry and just blew up because it was such a great idea, but that gets money into underserved and more diverse populations to get them involved in not just outdoor recreation activities, but career tracks and everything along those lines. So I'm excited to be introducing that on Thursday. But again, and also on Thursday, just FYI, one of our headliners I like to talk about is former Governor Tony Knowles will be in on that conversation as well. And that man is synonymous with trails. And in Blanchard, if you're there to tell him about your hut to huts, I'm sure he'd be receptive. But anyway, thank you again to everyone who took part and listened in today, your questions. And thanks again to our panelists and Dan for moderating. And I look forward to seeing everyone tomorrow and on Thursday back here on Zoom for the 5th annual conference. Thank you.
Thanks, Lee.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye. Thanks, Lee.